true. Like you mentioned, you mentioned the vitamin D levels. And so people, the majority population here in America just tends to think of themselves most, right? It's because, and just the same way we think of ourselves, we think of African Americans, more so than we think of other communities. And so it's like the majority population doing that. And so the medical care that most people get is the medical care that white Americans need, right?
Specifically white males, because I hear the white females are beginning to complain about it as well.
And you're right, and that's true, right? And so white American males don't need a vitamin D test. They don't need a PSA screen. They don't need to be screened for prostate cancer as aggressively. They don't need, there's a lot. They don't need to take zinc supplements. They don't need to take potassium supplements. And so that's what's taught in medical schools. That's what's taught in residencies, those approaches. And that's why I didn't know anything. I trained at Cleveland Clinic, one of the best hospitals in the world. They were thinking about, best practices in African Americans, and not that anyone was, right? Or the Mayo Clinic or Harvard or any of those places, they weren't necessarily trying to spend any time on that. But what's happened, and I think a lot of that grew out of African Americans, we spend a lot of time wanting to be the same. We're just like you. We're just as good as you. We're the same as you, except for the color of our skin or the grade of our hair. And we push that a little too far, right? Because we're not just like them. We're 99.99% the same, but that 0.00 whatever percent that's different makes all the difference. That's where your increased risk that you mentioned earlier about, increased benign ethnic neutropenia, increased low white blood cell count, increase, I have APOL1 gene that runs in my family. It gives premature hypertension and kidney failure. That's a gene that really comes from Africa that it allows protection to African sleeping sickness. Actually, one gene or two copies of it gives you protection to African sleeping sickness, but the trade-off is you get increased hypertension that leads to kidney failure. And I've had two uncles die in their 30s with kidney failure, and I have a brother who died in his 40s from kidney failure. And so it's a burden. That's a gene. You can't change your genes, but what you could do is start screening for that gene and treating the blood pressure more aggressively. So we can there's things that we could do to put off kidney failure, bring down the blood pressure, and try to maximize health in people with those populations. So, and then there's dietary issues. We mentioned earlier before the show that African Americans tend to eat less. They drink much less milk, right? So where are you going to get vitamin D? And you're either going to get it from the sun or from vitamin D milk, right? We're not in the sun. We're not drinking milk because of increased lactose intolerant, which is also tends to be genetic. And so we tend to, we eat more chicken, so that rumor tends to be true. We eat a little bit more fish, but we'll eat less of other things, there's dietary patterns where we tend to eat less processed food. People, for whatever reason, we like cooking our own food. There's not,
we eat less processed?
Less processed food in the form of pre-prepared foods. Now, there's also a lot more fast food, right? Which is processed. But I'm saying when you look at the grocery cart for an African American, you're not going to see Swanson's TV dinners, a lot of Stouffer's frozen dinners. You're going to see we tend to cook more food from scratch, but there's still bad habits. My mother did. You got to put a ham hock and some greens. So now we're putting smoked turkey into greens or vegetables now. Whereas my mother and my grandmother would put a piece of pork, salt pork, into those vegetables. And so we tend to cook vegetables more than eat them raw. So there's all these things that education can help us to migrate to better practices that really won't impact the quality of our lives. And there's some things that we can do, like you say, just taking a supplement, just taking a vitamin D supplement at the right amount. So the recommended daily amount of vitamin D you need is 600 international units. So you being the white male we talked about, 600. So African Americans need way more than that, 2,000. Yeah. And that's if you're not deficient. I mean, if you're deficient, you need to take even more to get to the point where you're not deficient. And then you need 2,000 on a daily basis beyond that. And you mentioned prostate cancer. People have linked the increased prostate cancer to increased zinc deficiency. And that zinc deficiency has been linked to the increased HIV epidemic and the COVID susceptibility. And because zinc fights off infections, it fights off all kinds of flu, the cold, COVID, all those things. Zinc has been shown, increased zinc levels have shown to fight that off. And when we see that increased burden in communities, in African American communities, they're attaching that to some widespread zinc deficiency. And there are foods that are higher in zinc we don't get. We don't eat a whole lot of salmon, fresh
oysters, shellfish, all that good stuff. Yeah.
Right.